The basement smelled like motor oil and betrayal. I sat hunched over my workbench, staring at the credit card statement that had arrived 3 hours ago, while upstairs my wife Lila packed for what she called a strategic planning conference with her work husband Brandon Harker. 14 nights, same hotel, same room. You know what's funny about hepatitis B? I called up the stairs, my voice echoing through our craftsman home like a death rattle. It spreads through bodily fluids, real inconvenient for people who like to share. Lila's laugh drifted down, light and careless. Oh, Eli, you're so paranoid. It's just a work trip. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Just a work trip. Right. And I'm just a mechanical engineer who definitely doesn't know how to access hotel booking systems with my old IT credentials from the tech firm where she works, where they both work, where everyone knows everyone's business, except, apparently, the husband. I pulled up her laptop, she'd left it open, trusting soul that she is, and started typing. The password was still Eli Lila 2019, which would have been touching if it wasn't about to destroy my marriage. Her work email loaded with corporate efficiency, all clean lines and professional fonts that couldn't hide the rot underneath. There it was, confirmation for the Grand Harbor Resort, executive suite, 2 weeks, and buried in her sent folder, a message to her office bestie Jenna. Don't worry, I covered the story with HR. Brandon and I deserve this after the quarterly hell. Enjoy your 2 weeks of freedom. XOXO. Freedom. That's what she called it. My phone buzzed. A text from my old friend Frankie Cruz, ex-military turned security consultant, probably wondering why I'd been radio silent for 3 days. I typed back, "Need a favor? You still know your way around a GPS tracker?" His response came back instantly. "You buying drinks or bail?" Both, probably. Upstairs, I heard the zipper of her suitcase, final and decisive. Lila appeared at the top of the basement stairs, all blonde hair and nervous energy, looking like she was heading to salvation instead of damnation. "I'll miss you," she said, and I almost believed her. "Miss me too," I replied, "especially when you're getting tested for communicable diseases." She laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. "You're impossible, Eli Granger. That's what you married me for." 20 minutes later, she was gone, and I was alone with the truth and a basement full of tools that suddenly seemed very useful for purposes other than fixing motorcycles. I called Frankie. "Jesus, Eli, it's 11 at night. This better be good. My wife's cheating on me with her coworker. They're spending 2 weeks at a resort and I need to know everything they do, everywhere they go, and everyone they talk to." Silence. Then, "You want the full surveillance package or just the highlights?" "Everything. And Frankie, make it hurt." The rusty anchor hadn't been updated since the Carter administration, which made it perfect for the kind of conversation that could end careers. Frankie slid into the booth across from me, looking like he'd stepped out of a military recruitment poster despite being 3 years out of the service. "GPS tracker's military grade," he said, sliding a device the size of a matchbook across the scarred wooden table. "Battery life of 6 months, updates every 30 seconds, and completely undetectable unless you know what you're looking for." And Brandon Harker definitely doesn't know what he's looking for. Nobody that pretty knows how to look for anything. Frankie took a swig of his beer. "You sure about this, man? Once we cross this line, there's no going back." I thought about Lila's laugh when I'd mentioned hepatitis. Light, careless, guilty. "We crossed the line 2 weeks ago when she booked that hotel room. I'm just evening the score." The parking garage at Harker's condo complex was a concrete tomb at 2 in the morning. His BMW sat in space 247, gleaming under the fluorescent lights like it was posing for a magazine ad. Just like Brandon himself. All surface, no substance. "Motion sensors on the 3rd level," Frankie whispered, pointing to a camera that was definitely not watching us. We've got maybe 4 minutes before the security guard makes his rounds. I slid under the BMW while Frankie kept watch, the tracker attached to the undercarriage with a magnetic click that sounded like a death sentence. 4 minutes later, we were ghosts in the night, and Brandon Harker's every movement belonged to me. "You know what's funny about cheaters?" I said as we walked back to my truck. "They think they're so smart, but they always leave a trail. Digital breadcrumbs leading straight to hell." "You're starting to sound like a movie villain, Eli." "Good. Maybe it's time I embraced the role." The next evening, I was back at the Rusty Anchor, nursing a whiskey and listening to Jenna Morrison hold court at the bar. Lila's office bestie was 3 drinks in and feeling chatty, which was exactly what I'd hoped for when I'd anonymously sent her a gift card to this place. "I'm telling you, Sasha, Lila deserves this vacation," Jenna was saying to another woman I recognized from office Christmas parties. "The way she's been working, and with all the stress at home." Stress at home. That was a new one. "Plus Brandon's got stamina," Jenna continued, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a whisper. "Like Olympic-level stamina. Lila said he could go for hours." Sasha giggled like a teenager. "Did she really say that?" "Cross my heart. She said Eli's been distant lately. Cold, like he's not even there anymore. I wasn't cold. I was calculating. There's a difference, though I suppose the end result looked the same from the outside." My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Paula Morse, my friend from medical school who'd ended up in emergency medicine instead of engineering like me. "Just so you know, hepatitis B is a witch. Did you say Brandon was just diagnosed last month? Because HR's been whispering about someone out sick." I smiled and typed back, "Interesting. Very interesting." The voice recorder I'd planted in Lila's home office was smaller than a thumb drive and more sensitive than a guilty conscience. By the time she returned from her conference, I'd have enough material to write a book about betrayal. But first, I needed to plant a seed, something that would grow into full-blown panic by the time she walked through our front door. I opened my laptop and began composing an email to Brandon's personal account, using a throwaway address that couldn't be traced back to me. "Brandon, thought you should know that HR has been asking questions about your recent medical leave. Something about hepatitis B and exposure protocols. Might want to get ahead of this before it becomes a bigger problem. A concerned colleague, send." Phase 2 was officially in motion. Lila came home glowing like she'd found religion at the bottom of a hotel swimming pool. She had gifts, a t-shirt for me, some local honey, the kind of souvenirs that scream, "I was definitely not having an affair" to anyone paying attention. "How was the conference?" I asked, accepting her kiss on the cheek like a communion wafer. "Productive. Really productive. Brandon and I made some major breakthroughs on the Morrison account." Brandon and I, not the team or we or the conference attendees. Brandon and I, like they were a unit now. "Speaking of Brandon," I said, pouring myself coffee with steady hands, "did he mention his hepatitis B diagnosis? Because if you two were sharing drinks or anything?" The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. "What?" "Hepatitis B. It's a blood-borne pathogen, but it can be transmitted through other bodily fluids too. Saliva, sweat, other things." I shrugged like we were discussing the weather. "I'd get tested if I were you. Better safe than sorry." She stammered something about being careful, about not sharing drinks, about how she barely knew Brandon outside of work. Each lie landed like a physical blow, and I absorbed them all with the patience of a man who knew the truth. "I'm sure it's nothing," I said. "But you know how these corporate environments can be, people sharing everything." She fled to the bathroom, and I heard her making a phone call. Jenna, probably, or maybe Sasha. Definitely not Brandon, because Brandon was currently driving back from the same resort, and my GPS tracker was telling me he'd stopped at 3 different pharmacies along the way. Panic makes people stupid. It was a lesson I'd learned in engineering school when a professor deliberately gave us impossible problems just to watch us spiral. The students who stayed calm found solutions. The ones who panicked made mistakes that compounded until the whole project collapsed. Lila was about to learn that lesson the hard way. I left Brandon's medical test results, carefully crafted from publicly available information about hepatitis B protocols, on the kitchen table where she'd find them. Not his actual results, of course, because those didn't exist, but a very official-looking document from the county health department about exposure protocols and contact tracing that would send her straight into full panic mode. She found them 20 minutes later. I heard the paper crinkle, then a sharp intake of breath, then the sound of her dialing her phone with shaking fingers. "Paula, it's Lila Granger. I need to schedule some tests, immediately. Paula Morse had been my friend for 15 years, and she owed me 3 favors from medical school. I was about to call in all of them." "Of course, Mrs. Granger. Can you come in this afternoon? And just so I can prepare the right panels, have you had any potential exposure incidents recently? Any contact with someone who might be carrying hepatitis B?" The silence stretched like a guitar string about to snap. There might have been some contact. With a colleague. We were traveling together for work." "I see. And the nature of this contact?" Another silence. Longer this time. "We were close during the trip, sharing meals, drinks, that sort of thing." "I understand. We'll run a full panel. In the meantime, you should inform any other partners about potential exposure. Your husband, for instance." "My husband doesn't need to know about this. Mrs. Granger, if you've been exposed to hepatitis B, anyone you've had intimate contact with needs to be informed. It's not just medical protocol, it's the law." I smiled as I listened from the next room. Paula was good at this, better than I'd hoped. "How long before we know the results?" 72 hours for the rapid panel. But Mrs. Granger, I have to ask, this colleague you were traveling with, has he been tested recently?" I don't know. I think so. Maybe. You might want to find out. If he's positive, we'll need to start post-exposure prophylaxis immediately." Lila hung up and immediately called someone else. Brandon, this time. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "A big problem." The parking garage at Brandon's condo complex looked different at midnight when you were hunting instead of hiding. I'd been waiting for 2 hours, watching the GPS tracker on my phone show his BMW making stops at 2 different bars and a pharmacy. Now he was finally coming home to face the music. His headlights swept across the concrete as he pulled into space 247, and I stepped out of the shadows like something from his worst nightmare. "Brandon Harker," I said, my voice echoing off the low ceiling. "We need to talk." He fumbled with his keys, trying to play it cool. "Eli? Jesus, you scared the shit out of me. What are you doing here?" "Funny thing about hepatitis B," I said, walking slowly toward him. "It's not the only thing that spreads. Secrets do too." His face went pale under the fluorescent lights. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. 2 weeks at the Grand Harbor Resort, executive suite, room service charges for 2, my wife coming home with a tan in places that don't see the sun." He tried to step around me, but I moved to block his path. Not threatening, just present, like a wall made of consequences. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble." Too late for that. I pulled out my phone and showed him the GPS tracking app. "See this? That's your car. I know where you've been, where you're going, and how fast you drive. I know you stopped at 3 pharmacies today and 2 bars. I know you're scared. You're crazy. No, I'm thorough. There's a difference." I stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the whiskey on my breath. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay away from my wife. You're going to transfer to a different department, and you're going to pray that I don't decide to share what I know with your ex-wife's divorce attorney." He swung at me then, a wild haymaker that telegraphed itself from 3 feet away. I caught his wrist, twisted it just enough to make him gasp, and slammed him back against his BMW. "That was stupid," I said, my face inches from his. "But I'm feeling generous tonight, so I'm going to pretend it didn't happen. Next time, I won't be so forgiving." I released him and stepped back. He rubbed his wrist, trying to look defiant but mostly looking scared. "And Brandon? Hope you've got good insurance on this car. Parking garages can be dangerous places." I walked away, leaving him standing there in the fluorescent gloom. Behind me, I heard him fumbling with his phone, probably calling Lila. That was fine. Let them panic together. Frankie was waiting in my truck, grinning like a wolf. "How'd it go?" "Phase 3 is complete. You bring the supplies?" He held up a bag from the hardware store. "Sugar, spray paint, and a valve stem tool. This is going to be beautiful." We waited until Brandon's lights went out, then got to work. The sugar went into his gas tank, an old myth, but it would make him paranoid about engine trouble for months. The spray paint went under his windshield wipers. Carrier, in big red letters. And the valve stem tool let all the air out of his tires without actually damaging them. "You know he's going to call the cops," Frankie said as we finished up. "Let him. I've got an alibi for tonight, and there's no law against being in a public parking garage." "What's your alibi?" "I was at the Rusty Anchor until closing time. Then I went home and called my buddy Frankie to complain about my marriage. You'll back me up, right?" "Always do." The next morning, Detective Harris showed up at my door with questions and a skeptical expression. He was a thin man with gray hair and eyes like a polygraph machine. "Mr. Granger, we had a report of harassment last night. Someone matching your description was seen in the parking garage at Brandon Harker's residence." "That's interesting," I said, pouring coffee like we were old friends. "What time was this supposed harassment taking place?" "Around midnight. I was at the Rusty Anchor until they kicked everyone out at 2 a.m. Then I came home and called my friend Frankie Cruz to cry about my wife. You can check with the bartender, or with Frankie, or with the security cameras at the bar." He made notes in a little notebook. "And you don't know anything about vandalism to Mr. Harker's vehicle?" "I know that parking garages are dangerous places. All sorts of things can happen when you leave your car unattended." I smiled. "Would you like some coffee, Detective? You look tired." "I'm fine. Just stay away from Mr. Harker, okay? Whatever's going on between you two, work it out like adults." "Of course, I'm a very adult person, Detective Harris. I believe in handling problems through proper channels." After he left, I called Paula Morse. "How did Lila's appointment go?" "She's terrified. Kept asking about exposure protocols and whether her husband needed to be tested. I told her we'd have results in 72 hours. "And the results will show?" "Whatever you want them to show, Eli." "But are you sure about this? This is getting pretty elaborate." "She destroyed 14 years of marriage for 2 weeks with a man who doesn't even respect her enough to use protection. I think elaborate is exactly what she deserves." The tech firm's office building was all glass and steel, reaching toward heaven like a chrome-plated middle finger. I sat in the parking lot, watching Lila's car in the executive spaces, knowing that in about 10 minutes, her entire world was going to collapse. The beauty of modern technology is that it makes revenge so much more efficient. One wrong click, one misdirected email, and suddenly everyone knows everyone else's business. It's like the old party game telephone, except instead of whispered secrets, you're broadcasting high-definition betrayal to an audience of co-workers who live for this kind of drama. I'd spent 3 hours crafting the perfect accident, a reply-all email to the quarterly planning committee, ostensibly about budget allocations, with an attachment that definitely wasn't the Morrison account spreadsheet. Instead, it was a carefully curated collection of text messages between Lila and Brandon, complete with timestamps and GPS data showing they were sent from the same hotel room. "Can't wait to feel you inside me again," was probably not the kind of strategic planning the committee expected to review. My phone buzzed with a text from Frankie. Package delivered. Fireworks should start in 3, 2, 1. Through the office building's glass walls, I could see people gathering around computer screens. Someone was pointing, someone else was laughing, and somewhere in that chrome and steel monument to corporate ambition, my wife was discovering that secrets have a way of growing legs and running straight to HR. I drove to the Rusty Anchor to wait for the fallout. Jenna Morrison arrived first, looking like someone had told her Christmas was canceled. She ordered 3 shots of tequila and drank them like medicine. "Rough day at the office?" I asked, sliding onto the bar stool next to her. She looked at me like I was a ghost. "Eli? What are you doing here?" "Drowning my sorrows. Heard there was some excitement at the firm today." "You could say that." She ordered another shot. "Your wife and Brandon Harker just became the most popular topic of conversation in company history." "Really? What did they do?" She stared at me for a long moment. "You know exactly what they did. The question is, how did those text messages end up in everyone's inbox?" "Technology's a funny thing, Jenna. Sometimes it works perfectly, and sometimes it reveals things we'd rather keep hidden." I raised my beer. "To transparency in the workplace." She didn't toast with me. Sasha arrived 20 minutes later, followed by 2 other women from the office I didn't recognize. They huddled around Jenna like she was dispensing state secrets. "HR called an emergency meeting," one of them said. "They're reviewing the harassment policies and the fraternization guidelines." "What about Lila and Brandon?" "Suspended pending investigation. Apparently there's a whole paper trail of policy violations." "And the hepatitis thing?" Jenna looked around nervously. "That's not confirmed, but if it's true, the liability issues alone." I smiled into my beer. The hepatitis thing wasn't true, of course, but by the time anyone figured that out, the damage would be done. Rumors have a way of becoming truth in the corporate world, especially when they're juicy enough to repeat. My phone rang. Lila. "Eli, we need to talk." "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. Meet me at home, now." "I'm having a drink with some friends from your office. They're telling me the most interesting stories." Silence. Then, "Please, just come home." "I'll be there in an hour, maybe 2. Depends on how many more interesting stories I hear." I hung up and ordered another beer. Around me, the conversation continued, growing more animated with each drink. The story was evolving, the way stories do, picking up details and dramatic flourishes with each retelling. By closing time, Brandon Harker would be an intimate predator, and Lila would be patient 0 in a hepatitis outbreak. Sometimes the truth is less important than the narrative. Sasha was on her 4th drink when she started talking about the clinic visit. "Jenna, you should have seen her yesterday. She was shaking when she came out of that doctor's office." "What did the doctor say?" "Something about contact tracing and legal obligations." Lila looked like she was going to throw up. "Do you think Eli knows?" They all looked at me. I raised my beer again. "Eli knows everything, ladies. The question is, what's he going to do about it?" The warehouse district looked like the apocalypse had come and gone without bothering to clean up. Empty buildings stretched along the river like broken teeth, their windows dark and their loading docks choked with weeds. It was the perfect place for the kind of conversation that ends relationships and starts lawsuits. I'd chosen Building 47 because it had the best acoustics: high ceilings, concrete walls, and a loading dock that opened onto the main street where people gathered for the food trucks every Friday evening. Tonight was Friday, and I was counting on an audience. Frankie had spent the afternoon setting up speakers and testing the sound system. Military-grade equipment, he'd assured me, designed for battlefield communications, but perfectly suited for broadcasting betrayal to anyone within a 3-block radius. "You sure about this?" he asked, adjusting the final microphone. "Once we flip this switch, there's no taking it back." There was no taking it back the moment she booked that hotel room. I tested the voice recorder I'd planted in Lila's office. the one that had captured weeks of incriminating conversations. She made her choice. Now she gets to live with the consequences. My phone buzzed with a text from Lila. "Where are you? We need to talk about what happened today." I typed back, "Warehouse District, Building 47. Come alone and bring Brandon. Time to settle this like adults." "Eli, please, let's handle this privately. Privacy is overrated. See you at 8. They arrived separately, which was smart, but not smart enough. Lila's car pulled up first, followed 5 minutes later by Brandon's BMW, still sporting the red paint under his windshield wipers. They met at the loading dock, talking in hushed voices, probably planning their strategy. I watched from the shadows as they approached the building. Lila looked nervous, checking her phone every few seconds. Brandon looked angry, his jaw set like he was preparing for a fight. "Eli?" Lila called out as they stepped inside. "Are you here?" "Right here," I said, stepping into the light. The warehouse was mostly empty except for some old equipment and the speakers Frankie had positioned around the space. "Thanks for coming, both of you." "Look, man," Brandon started. "Whatever you think happened, I know exactly what happened." I pulled out my phone and showed them the GPS tracking data. 2 weeks at the Grand Harbor Resort. Same room, same bed, same lies. Lila's face crumpled. "Eli, I can explain." "No need. I have recordings." I nodded to Frankie, hidden in the shadows, and he activated the sound system. Suddenly, the warehouse filled with Lila's voice, crystal clear and damning. "Brandon's got stamina, like Olympic-level stamina. Eli's been so distant lately, so cold. It's like he's not even there anymore." Then Jenna's voice. "You deserve this vacation, Lila. After everything you've been through at home." Then Lila again. "I don't feel guilty. I feel alive for the first time in years." The recordings played for 5 minutes, each clip more devastating than the last. But the real surprise was that the speakers weren't just broadcasting inside the warehouse. They were broadcasting outside, too, to the street where the Friday evening crowd was gathering. "Turn it off," Lila whispered, her face white with horror. "Why? You said you didn't feel guilty. You said you felt alive." I walked closer, my footsteps echoing off the concrete. "This is you being alive, Lila. This is your truth." Brandon tried to run then, heading for the loading dock, but I was faster. I grabbed his arm and spun him around, slamming him back against a stack of wooden crates. "You want to run? Good instinct, but you can't outrun your own words." I nodded to Frankie again, and Brandon's voice filled the warehouse. "Eli Granger is the most boring man alive. No wonder his wife needed a real man to show her what she was missing." "I never said that," Brandon protested. "Voice analysis doesn't lie, unlike you." Through the loading dock, I could see people gathering on the street, drawn by the voices and the drama. Some were holding up phones, recording everything. In the age of social media, privacy was just another word for denial. Detective Harris appeared in the doorway, looking tired and annoyed. "Mr. Granger, we've had noise complaints." "Just having a conversation, Detective. Nothing illegal about conversation." "Public humiliation might be illegal." "Is it humiliation if it's true?" I gestured to Lila and Brandon. "They're free to leave anytime they want. No one's holding them here." Lila was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks like black rivers. "Eli, please, I'm sorry, I made a mistake." "You made a choice, 14 days of choices. This is just the consequence." That's when Dr. Paula Morse stepped out of the shadows, looking professional in her white coat and stethoscope. She'd been my ace in the hole, the final piece of the puzzle. "Actually," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the speakers, "there's something everyone should know about the hepatitis B situation." The crowd outside went quiet. Even Detective Harris leaned in to listen. Brandon Harker was never diagnosed with hepatitis B. The medical leave he took last month was for a completely different condition. a condition he lied about to avoid his ex-wife's demands for increased alimony. Brandon's face went from pale to red to purple. That's confidential medical information. Not when you use it to defraud your employer and endanger other people's health. Paula held up a folder. I have documentation of your actual medical visits, Brandon. Would you like me to share what you are really being treated for? This is insane, Lila said, looking around the warehouse like she was trapped in a nightmare. Eli, what have you done? I've given you exactly what you wanted. Freedom, transparency, the chance to live your truth in front of everyone who matters. I smiled, and it felt like broken glass. You gambled everything on a man who lies about his medical history and mocks your husband to strangers. You lost. The crowd outside was getting bigger. I could see people from the office, neighbors, random strangers drawn by the spectacle. Someone had started live streaming on social media. Game over, I said. Detective Harris stepped forward. All right, that's enough. Everyone needs to clear out. Of course, Detective. I walked toward the loading dock, Frankie falling into step beside me. We were just leaving anyway. Lila grabbed my arm as I passed. Eli, wait. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can... I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. You spent 2 weeks in paradise with another man. I spent 2 weeks in hell, planning this moment. Which one of us do you think enjoyed it more? I pulled free and walked out into the night, leaving her standing in the wreckage of her own making. Epilogue. Roasting marshmallows. The rain started as Lila and Brandon slunk out of the warehouse, hounded by cameras and questions they couldn't answer. They got into separate cars and drove away in opposite directions, probably for the last time. I stood in the loading dock doorway, watching the crowd disperse, feeling the weight of what I'd done settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Frankie appeared beside me, lighting a cigarette despite the rain. You know there's no coming back from this, he said. I know. Your marriage is over. Her career is over. His career is over. You've basically nuked everyone's life, including your own. I know that too. Any regrets? I thought about it for a long moment, watching the rain wash the last of the crowd away. In a few hours, the videos would be all over social media. By tomorrow, everyone in the city would know the story. By next week, it would be legend. You know what I always wondered? I said finally. What I'd do if I caught her cheating. Turns out I'd burn it all down and roast marshmallows on the ashes. Frankie laughed, short and sharp. That's the most honest thing you've said all night. Honesty's all I have left. We stood there in the rain, two men who'd just committed the perfect crime of revenge, watching the warehouse district return to its usual darkness. Somewhere in the city, Lila was probably calling lawyers. Brandon was probably calling his ex-wife to explain why his alimony payments were about to stop. And I was standing in the rain, feeling something that might have been satisfaction if it didn't hurt so much. What now? Frankie asked. Now I go home to an empty house and figure out what the rest of my life looks like. Lonely? Probably, but at least it'll be honest. I walked to my truck, started the engine, and drove home through the rain. The house felt different when I opened the door, bigger somehow, like Lila's absence had expanded the space. I went down to the basement, to my workbench and my tools and my plans for revenge that were now just memories. On the table was the credit card statement that had started everything, still open to the page showing 14 nights at the Grand Harbor Resort. I picked it up, carried it to the fireplace, and set it on fire. The flames were small but satisfying, like justice served at exactly the right temperature. Outside, the rain continued, washing the city clean for tomorrow's sins. Inside, I sat in my chair and watched the paper burn, thinking about choices and consequences and the price of honesty in a world built on lies. I'd won. I'd lost. I'd destroyed everything I'd spent 14 years building, and I'd do it all again.